I never thought I'd be the person standing in a courtroom, staring down my own parents while a family court judge read them the riot act. But life has a funny way of forcing your hand when the people who are supposed to protect you turn a blind eye to a helpless child. For the last 3 years, my parents completely neglected my brother's 8-year-old daughter, Lily, treating her like an unwanted ghost in their own home while pouring all their love, money, and attention into my other brother's kids. They thought they could get away with it because my brother was out of the picture and they had legal guardianship, but they didn't count on me keeping a meticulous, unbreakable paper trail of every single instance of emotional abuse and neglect. When the truth finally came out in front of the judge, their own words and text messages were what destroyed them, and now the entire family is fractured beyond repair, calling me a traitor and a monster for tearing us apart. I need to know, honestly, was I wrong for what I did, or would you have done the exact same thing to save a little girl's life? To understand how things got this bad, you have to understand the dynamic of my family, which has always been built on a foundation of extreme favoritism. I have 2 brothers, Marcus and David. Marcus was always the golden child in my parents' eyes. He married a woman they approved of, got a high-paying corporate job, and had 2 kids, Leo and Chloe, who my parents absolutely worship. David, on the other hand, was the black sheep. He struggled with mental health issues and addiction for years, and 9 years ago, he had a brief relationship with a woman named Sarah, which resulted in the birth of my niece, Lily. Sadly, Sarah walked away shortly after Lily was born, leaving David as a single father. David tried his best. He really did, and for the first few years of Lily's life, he was doing well. But when Lily was 5, David suffered a massive relapse, and it became clear he couldn't care for her anymore. He voluntarily signed over temporary legal guardianship to our parents so he could go to a long-term rehabilitation facility out of state. I was living 2 hours away at the time, finishing my degree and starting my career, so I couldn't take Lily myself, though God knows I wish I had. My parents took Lily in, and at first, I thought she would be safe and provided for. I knew my parents could be critical and difficult, but I never imagined they were capable of the cold, calculated cruelty they inflicted on that little girl. The shift happened almost immediately after David left. Because Marcus's kids were the children of the golden child, they were treated like royalty. My parents bought them expensive clothes, took them on lavish vacations, and constantly bragged about them on social media. But Lily became an afterthought, a chore, a burden they felt forced to endure. It started with small things that I noticed whenever I came home to visit on weekends. Marcus's kids would be running around in brand new designer outfits, while Lily would be wearing faded, ill-fitting clothes that looked like they came from a clearance bin. When I asked my mom about it, she brushed it off, saying Lily was messy and ruined good clothes anyway, so there was no point in spending money on her. Then I noticed the bedroom arrangements. Leo and Chloe had their own beautifully decorated bedrooms at my parents' house for when they stayed over, packed with toys and electronics. Lily, who lived there full-time, was relegated to a tiny, windowless spare room in the basement that was half-filled with storage boxes. Her bed was an old, creaky cot, and she barely had any toys to call her own. It broke my heart, but whenever I tried to speak up, my parents would get incredibly defensive, telling me that I didn't understand the financial strain they were under, and that since David wasn't paying child support, they were doing Lily a favor just by giving her a roof over her head. As the months turned into years, the neglect escalated from financial disparity to outright emotional abuse. My parents would plan family day trips to amusement parks or zoos with Marcus, his wife, and their kids, and they would purposefully leave Lily behind with a babysitter, or worse, just expect me to watch her if I happened to be in town. They wouldn't even tell her where they were going. She would just wake up and find the house empty. I remember one specific weekend, I came to visit unannounced, and I found Lily sitting alone at the kitchen table eating dry cereal, while the rest of the family's social media pages were covered in pictures of Leo and Chloe riding roller coasters and eating ice cream with my parents. When Lily looked up at me with her big, tear-filled eyes and asked why she wasn't good enough to go with them, something inside me snapped. I realized then that my parents weren't just being careless. They were actively punishing an innocent 8-year-old girl for the mistakes of her father. David was still in rehab, having a really difficult recovery, So he had no idea what was happening, and Marcus completely enabled my parents because his own kids were benefiting from the favoritism. I knew right then that nobody was going to protect Lily except for me. That was the moment I started building my case. I knew that if I just went to Child Protective Services without ironclad proof, my parents would put on their best loving grandparents act, Marcus would back them up, and Lily would be left in an even worse situation, facing retaliation from them for blowing the whistle. So I became a ghost in their lives, quietly documenting everything. For over a year, I kept a detailed journal of every interaction. I took secret photos of Lily's living conditions compared to Marcus's kids' rooms. I saved every single text message from my mother where she complained about Lily, called her a parasite, or explicitly stated that she didn't want to waste money on David's mistake. I recorded audio conversations during family dinners where my parents would openly praise Leo and Chloe while completely ignoring Lily or snapping at her for just breathing. I gathered receipts showing my parents spending thousands of dollars on gifts for Marcus's kids while spending literally $0 on Lily's school supplies or birthday gifts. It was exhausting, and it felt dirty to spy on my own family, but every time I looked at Lily's sad, isolated face, I knew I had to keep going. The absolute breaking point happened during Lily's 8th birthday. I had driven down specifically to celebrate with her, bringing a nice cake and a beautiful dress I bought for her. When I arrived, I found out that my parents hadn't even bought her a card. There were no decorations, no presents, nothing. To make matters worse, my mom casually informed me that they were leaving in an hour because Marcus had bought tickets to a baseball game for Leo. And they were all going out to a celebratory dinner afterward. They weren't planning on taking Lily. They were just going to leave her home alone because they couldn't find a sitter and assumed I would just take care of it. When I confronted my mother in the kitchen, demanding to know how she could be so heartless on her own granddaughter's birthday, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "She doesn't deserve a party. Her father ruined this family, and she's just like him. We provide her food and a bed, and that's more than enough. If you care so much, you deal with her, but don't you dare ruin Marcus's day." She actually texted me later that afternoon, explicitly writing, "Stop trying to force us to love a child who is a constant reminder of David's failures. We do what we have to do, but we will not treat her the same as Marcus's children, and that is final." Little did she know, that text message was the final nail in her coffin. So that is the exact situation I was forced into. I was looking at a broken, neglected 8-year-old girl, and a family that completely refused to see her as human, all while holding a mountain of evidence that could destroy my relationship with my parents forever. Before I tell you what happened next in that courtroom, and how their own words completely ruined them, I want you to pause right now and comment below. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have kept the peace to protect your family, or would you have risked it all to save that little girl? Let me know, because the choice I made changed everything. Once I had that text message, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I contacted a family law attorney, showed him the mountain of evidence I had gathered over the past year and a half, and filed an emergency petition for custody of Lily. I didn't warn my parents. I didn't warn Marcus. They found out when the sheriff showed up at their door to serve them with the court papers. The fallout was immediate and explosive. My phone lit up with dozens of missed calls and vitriolic text messages from my mother, my father, and Marcus. They called me a backstabbing snake, an ungrateful child, and accused me of trying to ruin my parents' retirement. Marcus texted me saying I was dead to him and that I was tearing the family apart over nothing. They genuinely believed that because they hadn't physically abused Lily, they hadn't done anything wrong. They thought their status as wealthy, respected members of the community would shield them and that the court would laugh me out of the room. They hired an expensive lawyer, confident that they would crush me and keep guardianship just to prove a point. The day of the hearing arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was suffocating. My parents sat on the opposite side of the room, refusing to look at me, their faces twisted in smug arrogance. Marcus was sitting right behind them, glaring at me like he wanted to jump over the wooden barrier. When the judge called the case, my parents' high-priced lawyer stood up and gave a grand speech about how my parents were saintly grandparents who had taken in a child out of the goodness of their hearts when her own father abandoned her. He argued that I was just a bitter, jealous sibling trying to create drama and steal custody out of malice. He painted a picture of a loving, harmonious home where Lily was treated with nothing but kindness. My parents smirked, clearly thinking they had won right then and there. But then, it was my attorney's turn. My lawyer didn't give a long speech. Instead, he simply submitted our evidence packet, which included the chronological journal, the photographs of the basement bedroom, the financial records, and most importantly, printed transcripts of the text messages and the audio recordings. The judge, a notoriously strict family court veteran, told everyone to remain seated while she reviewed the documents. For 20 minutes, the courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of the judge turning pages. As she read, I watched her expression change from neutral curiosity to absolute horror, and then to pure, unadulterated rage. When she finished reading the text message, where my mother wrote that Lily was a constant reminder of David's failures, and that they would never treat her the same as Marcus's kids, the judge lowered the papers and stared directly at my parents. The look on her face was enough to make my mother's smug smile instantly vanish. The judge looked at my parents and said, "In my 15 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated, cold-hearted display of emotional cruelty from people who claim to be guardians." She then began reading my parents' own text messages out loud, letting their cruel words echo through the courtroom. My mother looked like she was about to faint, and my father turned bright red, staring at the floor. The judge pointed out how they had spent over $5,000 on vacations and gifts for Marcus's children in a single 6-month period, while spending less than $50 on Lily. She looked at Marcus and told him he should be ashamed of himself for participating in the alienation of an 8-year-old girl. Then, the judge looked at me and thanked me for having the courage to document the abuse and step up for my niece. She immediately terminated my parents' guardianship, granted me full legal and physical custody of Lily, and ordered CPS to conduct a full investigation into my parents' home to ensure no other children were at risk. She also ordered my parents to pay me child support, which was the ultimate insult to their pride. The aftermath was chaotic, to say the least. When we left the courtroom, Marcus cornered me in the hallway, screaming that I had destroyed the family name and that he would make sure I never saw his kids again. My mother was in tears, hysterical, screaming that I had humiliated her in front of a judge. I didn't care. I walked right past them, picked Lily up from the court-appointed social worker, and drove her to my apartment. The first few months were incredibly difficult. Lily was deeply traumatized. She was quiet, anxious, and constantly apologized for just existing. She would ask permission to eat, permission to use the bathroom, and she couldn't believe it when I took her shopping to buy her a whole new wardrobe of her own choice and gave her the master bedroom in my apartment. I put her in intensive child therapy, and slowly but surely, over the last several months, I have watched the light come back into her eyes. She is smiling, she is doing amazing in school, and for the first time in her life, she feels safe and loved. As for the rest of the family, they have completely cut me off, which honestly feels like a blessing. My parents tried to contest the child support order, but the judge shot them down instantly. David, who is finally doing better in his recovery program, found out about everything recently. He called me crying, thanking me for saving his daughter, and we are working on a plan for him to slowly re-enter her life under supervised visits once his therapists agree he is ready. Marcus and my parents still play the victims, telling anyone who will listen that I lied and stole their grandchild away out of spite, but the truth is on the record, and the judge saw exactly who they really are. I lost my parents and my brother through this process, but I saved my niece, and I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. Looking back on this entire nightmare, I've realized that blood doesn't make you family. Love, protection, and respect do. My parents thought they could hide their cruelty behind a mask of respectability, but a piece of paper and their own hateful words were all it took to unmask them. Protecting a vulnerable child will always be more important than protecting the fragile egos of abusive adults. If you believe I did the right thing by standing up to my family and saving Lily from a lifetime of emotional scars, please hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic and powerful stories just like this one. and share your final thoughts on this whole crazy mess in the comments section down below. I really want to hear what you think about how the judge handled my parents. Thank you for listening to my story, and I'll see you all in the next one.